declining, and our only option here is to actually try and increase it. One way to do that is for government to actually stimulate growth by pumping money into the economy. But as the minister pointed out, that every R1 the government is spending, they used to get R1.60 back. That is no longer the case. The productivity is falling. The government expenditure is no longer effective or efficient. Now, the importance of getting these growth rates right was highlighted in our previous presentations, because our tax revenue is based on these growth percentages, and our expenditure flows from that as well. If our growth does not reach the targets, we don't get the revenue coming in, but the problem is our expenditure is already fixed and has already been spent, and that means that our budget deficit grows even further. Now, one of the largest culprits for the budget deficit growing that big is the excessive public sector compensation. So if we look at that, we'll see that it has grown over the last decade, steadily growing quite at a rapid pace. It is now sitting at about 4.7 times larger than our per capita GDP. And I do just want to highlight Mr. Parks from COSATU mentioned that it has been steady at 35%. That is correct, but it's 35% of expenditure. Now, if your expenditure increases, then obviously your expenditure and compensation will also remain relatively stable. If you take the expenditure, the compensation of employees as a percentage of revenue, which is the income actually coming in, you'll see that that percentage has been steadily increasing, and it will reach 50% of that total revenue next year, meaning that 50% of all the income that comes in to our economy goes to government employees. Now, that is not a problem if we are receiving the services that we want. But at this stage, the increase in the government spending is not because we are getting more government employees. It's because of the increases that these individuals have been getting. And again, we don't have a problem with that if we see the corresponding service delivery being provided to the citizens of South Africa. Now, we do agree with the unions, though, is that we do have a shortage of teachers and nurses. So our problem is even bigger, that it seems to be we are employing the wrong people at the wrong salary rates, and that needs to be addressed urgently. Now, government has made a commitment to reduce the spending by 310 billion rand over the next 4 years. However, the concern there is that if you look at it, our actual expenditure year on year is not decreasing, it's actually going up. Now, what that means is that although our rate of government spending on salary employees is reducing, it actually is still increasing in real terms, and we need to get that reduction down. Now, the way in which the government is proposing to reduce the salary, I just want to point out one other thing. If you look at that 310 billion rand, that cut in expenditure is coming from healthcare, learning and culture, and peace and security. And our question is, we're not sure actually why it is coming from there. Quite concerning, because these are critical functions that we do need further assistance on. Now, the government is currently suggesting a 3-year wage freeze. We know that the last year of the wage reduction is sitting in court. So we hoped that that will reach a favorable outcome. But the problem with the wage freeze is if we look at the next slide, I can get to it, is that the COSATU is not going to take that lying down, neither will the other unions. So it really is a concern, because government's turnaround plan for our country's finances rests primarily on reaching this 3-year wage reduction, as well as the not paying the 3rd year of the wage agreement. So our question is, does government have a plan B? Because at the moment, it's a huge gamble on our company's finances if we are saying that we will reduce government expenditure and debt by reducing our wages, but if that is not what the unions have agreed to. So this does send a negative message to our investment community about our ability to control our finances. So we really do hope that there is a plan B, and that the unions will work together with government to reach a consensus that will be for the better of all of us. But we do urgently need a transparent productivity enhancement plan to ensure that our government employees are providing the services that we so desperately need. And that brings us on to the next risk, which is our SOEs. As we know, we've got about over 700 of those, and a lot of them have insufficient funds for the operational expenditure. Some of them are insolvent. Lots of them have guarantees and contingent liabilities that the government will have to foot the bill for. And we're also not sure how most of these are aligned to our bigger strategic policy framework. We need to, at some stage, recognize that we need to cut our losses before we carry on bailing these SOEs out. Of further concern is that the borrowing requirements, I think if we look at the total debt of the 10 of the biggest SOEs, it's sitting at 810 billion rand. A lot of them can no longer borrow in the local market. They're now having to go to the foreign markets. If you look at the percentage of foreign borrowing, it is increasing over the medium term, which means increased interest costs, which is not what we need at the moment. Also, Eskom is the biggest culprit here with a guarantee portfolio of 694 billion, of which a lot has already been used. Our next critical risk, similar to the SOEs, is the municipalities. The Auditor General summed it up quite nicely. There's not much to go around, yet not the right hands at the till. So the question is, if we look at this, the overall regression in the outcomes for these municipalities, 46 of them had a regressive outcome. 8%, only 8% had a clean audit. This cannot be acceptable, and yet we are still pumping money into these municipalities, expecting them to render these services, yet they're not managing their finances. Irregular expenditure sitting at 36 billion rand. So we have, again, municipalities, deterioration in financial health, huge deficits. They're not managing their finances correctly. In fact, some of them are breaking key government laws, and we have fruitless and wasteful expenditure increasing. So what do we actually do about this? All of this obviously leads to debt. And I just want to point back on the municipalities, though. If we look at water, electricity, for instance, just to take two examples, those prices have increased for the consumer by 213% over the last 10 years for water and 177% for electricity. Now, if we consider that the municipalities have a markup, they make a profit on providing these goods and services to the public of between 30 to 40%. The question is, why do they then owe Eskom 44 billion rand and 14 billion rand respectively? Where's that money going? Are they not collecting from the consumers? If not, we need to address that. Or if they are, why are they not paying it across to Eskom and the water boards, etc.? What is happening with that? Because it's critical, because it's affecting our basic services. And all of these concerns lead to an increased debt. And if we don't sort out this debt and we don't get it under control, we are going to be having a service delivery crisis. And if we look at 2019, we had 218 service delivery protests. That's almost one per day. And if we do not fix our municipalities and make sure that our infrastructure and our services are rendered to the public, we are going to have more unrest in this country. I know Kochte has said that they're looking at a rigorous financial monitoring regime that's going to be implemented. We'd like to know when and how soon, because it has to happen ASAP. All right, so what are the critical risks that we don't know? Well, first of all, COVID was one of them, and we do once again congratulate the National Treasury and SARS for acting so quickly to respond to the needs to try and balance the needs of the public in this regard and the public health versus the role of the economy. So kudos to them once again. Things that weren't highlighted enough in the budget were, the second one was the contingent liabilities. They're currently sitting at 1 trillion rand. The largest of that at the moment is the RAF, the Road Accident Fund. If you look at that, it's got almost 600 billion rand in net asset value or debt guarantees that will become due by the government. And if you, again, to put that in perspective, that's almost half of the tax revenue that we are getting in. That would be wiped out if the government was responsible to pay for that situation. The other one that we've highlighted before is the Government Employee Pension Fund. It is not at the moment funding the long-term liabilities as is required. We're looking at a minimum of between 8 to 6 billion rand additional liabilities for the government. So we urgently need some updates on those figures. The other one is to Regulation 28, and yes, they are welcome. However, we do need policy certainty in this regard. It has been said that they will not enforce prescription, but we'd like to see the final recommendations. We're looking forward to that, to see how that pans out. But we do hope that it, along with the loop structures, etc., and the changes to the financial immigration, keeping the foreign pension funds on immigration here for 3 years, it seems to be stating that the government is in really a tight financial situation, in a crisis as such, and trying to keep as much money here. So policy certainty in that regard would be appreciated, because it is making a lot of people and investors nervous. Another one that we highlighted before is potable water. 37% of our water is lost due to dilapidated infrastructure. 80% of our municipal sewage works are dysfunctional. That means our rivers are now becoming part of our sewage system, which is unacceptable. Now, we see no visible action has been taken by COGTA. We do know that in the structural investment plan that there is certain expenditure going to be spent on this, but we need to look at this as a matter of urgency. Otherwise, water is going to become our next major crisis after electricity. And then obviously our last one, crime. Without containing crime, including corruption, as Kusatu mentioned, we are going to get nowhere. So we need urgent action on this to make sure that the law is no longer broken. So what do we need? Overall expenditure to ensure that the promises of governments that government has made to reel in expenditure has actually happened, so that it doesn't bring into question the credibility of the commitments made by government, especially in the light of the rating agencies, is we need to government needs to stick to cutting its expenditure and to monitor this expenditure. Bringing in the zero-based budgeting in 2022 is too late. What happens in the meantime? We have expenditure that should not be incurred, that needs to be curtailed and monitored. So that has to happen as a matter of haste. We need performance management across the board in government. Too little accountability has been taken place, and we need individual performance measures, and that needs to be monitored. SOEs, we need to expedite the convictions for those held found guilty of corruption. They need to pay back the money, and we need to start looking at which SOE to our policy framework and cut our losses while we can. The municipalities, same thing. We need proper budget. We should not be allocating more money to these municipalities that are dysfunctional. We need to get them right. We can't be pumping money into something where the money just disappears and the services aren't actually rendered. We need COGTA to assist the Eskom and the water boards to collect the revenue from these municipalities, and the municipalities need to start collecting the money from the residents that are using these services. On the contingent liability side, we've got to monitor this continuously to ensure that we don't breach our debt levels that we've promised. And on the government employees front, we need an urgent updated actuarial valuation to understand what the government's liability is in that regard. So overall, as Kusatu said, we need a detailed action plan with dates, with persons responsible. It's just happening too slow. Things need to be sped up. And we need to restore credibility to our government's promises that it's continuously making. So what we see is the vision is present, but unfortunately the execution is lacking at this stage. And if we can get that right, we can avoid the iceberg. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Saika for that presentation. Can we get the next one, please?
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm trying to share my screen, but that's been disabled by the host. Alternatively, they can share the presentation on my behalf.
Hi, Matt, it's Alan. I'll make you co-host quickly. Give me a sec.
Thank you.
Here you go.
Thank you, Chairperson. Can you see the screen?
Yes, continue, please. You know you have your 10 minutes. We can see your screen very clearly.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all the honourable members, and thank you for the opportunity once again. This is the structure of the presentation, and I'd like to say I think the core message that we're trying to send is the impact of spending thus far, or the lack thereof, as opposed to looking at absolute numbers, but I'll get to the detail. We think that this moment and this MTBPS is one of the most crucial moments in our fiscal history. We recognize that we are in the middle of or on the verge of a fiscal crisis. And we would like to emphasize that we see the context in which the current decision making is playing out is the combination of COVID-19 and the impact of lockdown, as well as systemic looting of state resources. And I think this is something that needs to be emphasized more intensely, and it answers the question that Saika asks, where does the money go? In many instances, money is diverted to private interests as opposed to benefiting the public. So we spend significant amounts of money, but we don't really see increases in productivity, and that's the core problem in our view. What we see instead is an increased wage bill that is completely disconnected from the quality of service delivery. We see permanent corruption and maladministration without any significant consequences. And we see ad hoc solutions for SOEs and their financial situation that have obviously not alleviated the situation. And further, we see that plans are not implemented, as was mentioned before as well. And really a key problem is the ever-increasing debt that we face. We really are also seeing a problem in terms of fiscal sustainability in our tax revenue, whether that is sustainable. So we want to propose and recommend to the committee the establishment of a fiscal policy committee that can really focus on a fiscal rule, which we've seen lacking in South Africa, and we've seen the effects of that. We'd also like to see increased allocative efficiency to ensure that those elements that must remain in the budget that are essential will be more efficiently delivered for the money that we spend. And obviously this also includes addressing the debt issue. Crucially, we want to see more transparency in how government spends money. I agree with Kusatu in that the public procurement bill must be expedited to actually bring this about, and transparency should be enhanced in that bill when it reaches this committee. We agree that compensation is a problem. Despite capped growth, it is unaffordable. We recognize that the budget deficit is a structural issue. The wage bill is accounting for about 36% of expenditure, but labor productivity in government is low compared to the private sector. And I think, again, we have to recognize what we get for the money we spend on compensation. And if we don't get what we should, then it should be reduced. We really want to support Treasury's move to reduce expenditure that is excessive on remuneration in this regard, but we do believe that more must be done. Further, we want to see the persons, those hands at the till, need to change, and that needs to happen very quickly. In terms of public entities, obviously still a significant fiscal risk. We do not agree with ad hoc bailouts. I don't think anyone in this country agrees with this except government, and it is quite shocking to see that this is consistently the decision that is taken, regardless of how the context has changed and worsened. We think that SOEs like SAA and Denel should be let go, or should be completely and fundamentally restructured to reduce the risk that they pose. We especially disagree with the 10.5 billion rand that's been allocated to SAA and taken from virtually all other departments, most notably police. So the South African economic outlook is obviously very bleak. We recognize that this has been a problem for more than 10 years. And it is easy to attribute our poor economic performance to external and global factors. And of course, they matter, they have an impact. But we think that the issue is primarily attributable to domestic factors like corruption and maladministration and consistent misspending without any consequences or changes in the annual budget. And for that reason, we support zero-based budgeting, but I'll get to that later on. Again, the combined impact of state capture and lockdown has brought us to where we are now, and we cannot forget about that. We cannot only focus on what has happened as a result of COVID-19. That is only the cherry on the cake, if I can put it that way. And again, I need to emphasize the revenue shortfall that we face. We welcome an announcement on infrastructure investment and an increase of that, but in reality, that has decreased over the past 10 years. We want to emphasize that government has consistently indicated that they are going to increase expenditure on infrastructure, but that has not actually happened. So the announcement is welcome, but the reality would be much, much more welcome. And we do agree that more current expenditure needs to be shifted to capital expenditure. And those aspects of financial waste that have been consistent in the public sector need to be addressed, and that money could very easily be diverted to this kind of capital expenditure without increasing the rates of taxation. So stimulating local economic development, we believe, is extremely important. We haven't seen that On the contrary, we've seen the collapse of municipalities. As was said before, the financial state of the majority of municipalities is completely unacceptable, and we really would like to see Parliament and the provinces do more in this regard and really intervene in a manner that actually makes a difference, because that has not happened to date. We want to emphasize that accountability should be the cornerstone of democracy, and that the allocations of funds and changes in those allocations and changes in legislation, we agree, make no difference if there is not actually follow through and implementation and consequences for a lack of compliance. Economic enablers, we see the electricity or energy, transport and digital technology sectors as key enablers for economic growth. We would like to recommend that government should abandon its subsidization of fossil fuels and nuclear energy, since those are extremely capital intensive and centralized energy systems, which are obviously vulnerable to large scale corruption. And we've seen that, and we really believe that needs to stop. In terms of e-tolls, once again, we agree with virtually all Gauteng road users that that is something that should be abandoned, and that the PIC's unreasonable SANRAL bonds should be renegotiated urgently. The rail sector is in extremely poor state, and we think that more money needs to be spent to alleviate that problem. The money that's been allocated to the dismal failure of an SOE SAA is an example of money that could have been allocated to rail infrastructure and just really salvaging the situation there. We recommend a presidential task team to address that situation in particular, and we also very much welcome the rollout of additional spectrum. But again, this has been mentioned before, this has been announced, and everyone was quite happy, but it didn't actually happen. We also think that Parliament can play a significant role in bringing down the costs of data and communication to really enhance connectivity in South Africa. Tax revenue is expected to fall significantly, and apologies members, I'm going to have to start running through this, but we believe SARS and the MPA should get adequate allocations in particular. We also would like to see that spending
Please
really
round off, Outer. Your time is up. Please round off now.
Thanks, Chairperson. I'm timing myself at 8 minutes 40 seconds, but I'll finish up. We support zero-based budgeting, believe it must be at all levels of government. And we again recommend the establishment of a fiscal policy committee that is inclusive, something alternative to NEDLAC, which obviously has not achieved its objectives. And we really support allocated efficiency and an approach to that that includes civil society. We support zero-based budgeting, and we very much support and call for proactive financial intervention in broken municipalities and the financial support of the MPA and SARS. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Outer. I don't know when you started pressing your timer, but I looked and saw that you started at 9:32. So according to mine, you were supposed to finish at 9:42. Thank you so much. The last to present, honorable members, before we interact with the presentations, just before we continue with the other presentations, is FCSG. FCSG, can you please take the floor?
I'm sorry, Ms. Abraham, it's Alan. The program was updated. We sent out a revised program. I think the one you're reading from is still has, what do you call, the Budget Justice Coalition on there, and they withdrew. So therefore, we've got 3 presentations, which was Kasatu, Psych, and Outer, and then it's Q&A. So that's where we are, unless you obviously want to have.
No. So you're saying that FCSG is not there?
No, Madam Chair, we are here. I can present now or later. You must let me know.
So Alan, what did you say was the latest?
Now I'm just saying that we removed the Budget Justice Coalition because they indicated they're not presenting. So therefore, we've got 3 presentations, or we had 3, and then Q&A, and then after Q&A, it's then the next 3, which would be Fiscal Cliff, Hila, and Peter Meakin.
Okay, let's have Fiscal Cliff, and then we know we have 2 after that, ne? After the Q&A. Is that correct, members? Let's continue. Fiscal Cliff. Thank you, Alan.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Can you see my slides on your side?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes, as I'm just trying to get the slides going, does I? Okay, so just a quick overview of what we want to talk about today. I think if we take some highlights for us from the current MTBPS compared to the February budget, biggest problem, of course, the contraction in GDP, that minus 7.8% was a problem. And then, of course, for the type of analysis we do, that revenue under collection of 312 billion has a significant impact on our research, as I will show a little bit later. Then, of course, also, I think a lot of this has been said already, the whole idea about zero-based budgeting and when it will be implemented, some uncertainty about that still. And then the debt service cost. I just think that the changes compared to the February budget, I mean, the roughly 4 billion for the current fiscal year, 13 billion next year, and 27 in extra in 22-23. So that's already 45 billion extra in debt service costs. So that's also a major impact in our analysis. Just quickly, a lot have been said about the budget, whether it's expansionary or austerity. I think what is evident for us is that in the last 10 fiscal years, we have not seen any austerity in the budget. For us, austerity would mean at least a balanced budget where your revenue and expenditure is the same. We have not seen that, and actually an average deficit of 6.3% per annum. So running, so highly expansionary actually. Just again to see how we are doing relative to some of our peers. This is a slide I borrowed from a National Treasury presentation. And where you can see South Africa is the blue dot there, our public debt and deficit, definitely out of kilter with the rest of our
Do you
peers.
mind, sorry, can you pardon me? Do
Yes.
you mind switching on your camera? Because it is the request of broadcasting, please.
Apologies, can you see me?
Thank you. We can see you now.
Apologies, there's a okay, so if I can continue, just the black dot there on the screen, that's the emerging market average, and we are the blue dot there. So definitely in terms of both our public debt and our budget deficit, where it is standing currently, it is out of kilter. Okay, so I don't want to oversimplify, but let's just see what, according to us, have been happening during the 10 fiscal years. So the problem is we've had these expansionary budgets. This means that our budget deficit was relatively large each year. These annual deficits, of course, builds up into debt, and this pool of debt needs to be repaid as well as the interest on that. So, of course, as debt service cost rises, that again has a crowding out effect on various budget items. So for us, there is actually a bit of an irony in these figures, in the sense that the same large expenditure items, for example, civil service remunerations, which were allowed to rise quite fast in the last decade, are now being crowded out by increases in debt service cost, as well as general attempts to stabilize our debt levels. Again, these slides have been showed by some of the previous presenters, just again showing that compensation is outpacing both nominal GDP and per capita GDP. I'm not going to say too much about this slide, except that we've seen in the latest budget, whereas in previous budgets there were no general increases for civil servants, but also no reductions mentioned. We actually, for the first time, we see talks about actual reductions. So we will see if this can be maintained or achieved, but of course there remains various uncertainties. And again, we just want to highlight we want to say thanks for the inclusion of that compensation data annexure in the actual budget information, which is very helpful. Again, we've talked about the actual civil service remuneration figures. There you can see compared to the 2019 MTBPS, already large reductions made in the February budget. And then again, on the latest MTBPS, further reductions. So where we get to this wage freeze situation. Again, this slide have also been showed by some of the previous presenters, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But again, the problem is we are now actually taking money away from sectors that actually really need it. The problem is the previous 10 years, this was simply not kept into check, and which puts us now in a situation where there's no other choice. Government debt, of course, rising very fast, and the problem is if the forecast for this debt is still underestimated. We hope not, but it is very likely that these figures could still be underestimated. Funding changes, I don't want to say too much in detail, but just the problem is that if you listen to what Treasury has been saying, it is not just a case where the funds are available in the long-term capital markets anymore, and it's actually becoming evident that Treasury has to fund more on the short end of the market or the short-term loans, which of course has a lot of extra volatility and risks in them. And here again, I think this graph has also, or table has been showed previously also, but there you can see how, especially on the short term, a lot of almost 100 billion additional funding their requirement this year, and then also the foreign loans rising relatively fast, also about 100 billion extra compared to the February budget, which of course has a lot of additional exchange rate risks and things like that attached to it. So I think, yeah, for us, the story is really, it's currently a question of managing debt and how are we going to finance this, and this is for us almost the biggest story currently. A lot have been said about the so-called fiscal crisis. So just briefly again, what we look at specifically is 3 expenditure items: civil service remuneration, social assistance payments, and debt service costs, and we compare that to government revenue. As you can see there, in 2007-8, it was around 55% of tax revenue, and now it has increased to 75% in the February budget, and in the latest medium term, it is actually those 3 expenditure items will be more than 100% of tax revenue. Of course, one of the major problems was the big reduction in revenue, that 312 billion reduction. Of course, in our analysis, revenue is your limiting factor. So if we see that big, almost a quarter or 25% drop in the revenue this year, we can expect that the figures would look very bad. And indeed, if we look at the graph of how this looks, so basically it's those 3 expenditure items which we plot against a percentage of revenue. The red line at the bottom was how it looked in 2007. So at that stage, it was still relatively sustainable. Then the yellow line, you can see it moving up relatively strong towards the February budget. And now the green line where it totally goes out of 100%. But of course, what we want to see is how is this going to look forward. So this is the situation now. I'm not going to go in detail through all our assumptions, but let's just say we use, in most cases, the actual medium-term figures for the next 3 or 4 years, and then thereafter we include growth of average inflation or the average of the actual data sets. So, and this is what it will look like then. Our forecast going forward from February 2021, you will see as we go through the ceiling there for 100%, then there's a pullback. Of course, keep in mind those first 3 or 4 dots, the green line now is the actual budgeted figures. So one can only hope that those figures are not too optimistic. But the problem is there is almost a structural shift in this, as the way we term the fiscal cliff, the increase in that line, where in the next 10 years we can again be close to 100% of revenue. Okay, so just to end off, austerity budgets are inevitable. As South Africa did not have austerity budgets in the last decade. Owing to this, the problem is that we have not created enough capacity. The zero-based budget approach is appreciated, but there's still a lot of worries over the phasing in of this. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of crowding out effects that we are already seeing in the figures, and the shift in funding from Treasury side. Now, the fiscal cliff study group, we predicted that this crisis as long back as 2014. It has now been reached, and although some recovery is likely to follow, we have seen a structural shift in this analysis closer to the cliff. And of course, steps should be taken to avoid this.
You can round off on Indeed now. You've been rounding off for some time.
Sorry, my last slide. Only rapid economic growth can turn this position around. Again, that's a whole discussion on its own, and we hope that the forecast of a V-shaped recovery will be correct. And then lastly, I just want to make it evident that global lenders' willingness to provide funds should not be confused with South Africa's ability to repay it, especially in this situation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, honorable members. That's it for the first session of the presentations. Can we interact with the submissions that have been made, honorable members? Alan, you will assist me with identification of hands.
I've got Honorable George Mama.
Honorable George, yes.
May I proceed?
Any more takers? Okay, just 1 minute, Honorable George, so we can see if we can identify other members. Any more takers, honorable members?
That's the only hand, Mama, as I see it.
Sure. Thank you so much. Honorable George, over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, colleagues. I just want to ask of COSATU, you mentioned that there had been a discussion with the Minister or the Treasury regarding relief to distressed workers on their pension funds. Would you be able to share a little bit more information on that, either with this committee or with me, because obviously I'm very interested in it. Also, in terms of my bill, the private members bill, I did receive quite a lot of comment on it. It is now been referred to the committee. So that's now up to the committee to obviously discuss it, etc. As you were aware, my bill was very narrowly constructed in terms of providing loans to pension fund members backed by their own pension. Having said that, we are certainly not averse to any other way that we could also provide relief to distressed workers in these very difficult times. So I am very keen to get more detail on that, and that when my bill comes before the committee, we're very much open to having a discussion on how it could be broadened to accommodate that particular requirement. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you so much, Honorable George.
Hi, Chair.
Is there another hand?
Yes, I've got Mr. Karim as well.
Yes, Chairperson Yunus Karim, you can take over.
Thanks. I'm not taking over. I'm just making a point, my friend.
Take over the podium.
Okay. Very quickly, Chairperson. The first thing I wanted to say is that obviously there are differences between, the majority party and some of the stakeholders who made presentations on at least some of the issues. That's inevitable and understandable, and in fact, welcome. But ultimately, Chairperson, whatever our differences, we are all in the same boat. We have raised this before, that while we welcome critiques, and we ourselves make a critique of National Treasury, the government, and its budget proposals, and more than ever, you know, we just can't accept uncritically any budget or medium-term budget policy statement. But it's not as if, you know, the alternatives are very clear. And that's where the need for us to have critiques from stakeholders, but at the same time, alternatives becomes more important. Some of the people who make submissions to us have a technical expertise that most of us as politicians don't have. So once again, I'd like to make a general plea. Yes, you are right to say many of the things you do, but we are where we are. And a budget, as some of you know more than us, is a matter of trade-offs. We don't get enough of trade-offs. People make critiques, which we agree with many of the times. The values, I keep saying, and I've said this many times, between those who differ and ourselves with us, is actually similar. We all agree that these things have to be done. But we in a most difficult, perilous, uncertain, volatile, you can call it what you will, situation, we need more of the technical and political inputs from those who disagree with the budget, as indeed we do with aspects of it. What is the alternative? Where do we find you know, the money? That's the first point I wanted to say. Secondly, I hear Mr. Johnson speak about, a fiscal study group or structure. Wasn't very clear what exactly he means by this. Where would it be located, in Treasury, or where? Is it meant to be across ministerial departments and ministers, or what is it he really proposes? Maybe you know, he should say something about that. Thirdly, I wanted to ask something that now escapes me. I made a note here. If you give just a moment. What was the third point I wanted to raise? I'm getting old, Chairperson. Well, I can't find my notes right now. But the point is that, you know, some of the issues, Chairperson, that the stakeholders raise are, strictly speaking, appropriations issues. Now, clearly, it's not fair on the public that they make a submission to the fiscal framework, and then they're expected to come back to the Appropriations Committee and make another submission to the Appropriations Committee. So what we need to alert our friends from civil society to is that some of the proposals they have, this committee can't take any decisions on. We have to refer it to the Appropriations Committee. So in fact, we will do that. We will ask the research team and the staff to separate out the issues. So what's useful, though, is that in the NCOP, the same members who are in the Finance Committee are also, of course, in the Appropriations Committee, because there are limited numbers and the way the NCOP works differently from the NA. So at least on the NCOP side, we will, in fact, you'll be addressing, in fact, the Appropriations Committee simultaneously as you address the Finance Committee. And finally, the observations about municipality is largely correct. The chairperson of the Appropriations Committee, who's here with us, Lady Mashlangu, also observed yesterday that she's still traumatized by what she experienced last week in our provincial week. The NCOP does, in fact, visit the provinces regularly. We do look at municipalities, and we're looking at it ever more because of the elections that are looming. But the reality is that, you know, as everybody knows, the problems are huge. Some are structural, others can be dealt with by, you know, actions. So, you know, here again, we agree. And those issues can also be dealt with by the Appropriations Committee more than the Finance Committee, because they deal really with intergovernmental relations, and the NCOP is actually the main host and main structure dealing with that. So we agree with much that is said about municipalities, but we shouldn't be fatalistic. This country will not progress unless we get the municipalities right. And all of us, in whichever sphere we are, national, provincial, or local, have a duty in that regard. So thank you for that, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Any more hands, Alan?
For now, there's no other hands.
Okay, maybe I must just come in and maybe just a few comments that could be questions to the submissions. The first one is, of course, to COSATU, and I want to agree with them that it is not only the ministry that is in crisis or in looming crisis, it's the entire government. And as such, as Honorable Yunus has said, we need to really come up with proposals as solutions. The issue of banks, for example, one is interested to know how far we are with it. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Treasury on Friday as to what the progress is. And yes, I think there's reason to be concerned because this also is an issue of access which borders around issues of economic transformation. Just a question, maybe just a question for interest to COSATU as to what is their view of what is happening in Nedlec? Because for me, that's where we have to try and reach one another, speak with one voice, and try to be on the same wavelength with each other as various role players in government issues. Saika, you talk of policy certainty, and one is interested to know what you really mean about that. As Comrade Honorable Karim has indicated, you also speak to issues of cutting expenditure. And as you have already indicated, like COSATU, that cutting or freezing the wage bill is gonna be detrimental for not only the public service, but also for the country. So what are the alternatives? What are you proposing? But Auta, on the other hand, talks to an increased wage bill. What do you think is the solution? Because indeed, as a country, we need to seek solutions, all of us together. Remember, members, presenters, we're talking public procurement bill right now, but can we compare the bill to the triple FA so that we know for sure that if we say that the public procurement bill is trying to replace the triple PFA, where were the failures for the former? And on the very last point that the fiscal cliff made, and it was a point of emphasis and was written in green. I'm happy because it was not written in red. How exactly do you advise National Treasury to do that? Just be specific. Thank you so much. Can we have some responses? Can we start with COSATU again? Comrade Matthew?
Okay, no, thanks. Thanks, Comrade Chair, and thanks to honourable members. So I think to Honourable Dr. George, yeah, we'd be happy to discuss more in depth with yourself as well later if you want. But basically, we had raised this proposal as COSATU, and I think it is similar to your proposal in the Prime Minister's bill, about allowing workers who have experienced financial distress to access a limited portion of their pension funds. This is in order to avoid workers resigning from their jobs, which is what we don't want, and also cashing out the entire pension, which we don't want either, because that'll deplete the pensions and increase unemployment. But workers, even those who've got jobs, are experiencing huge financial distress. They have relatives who are unemployed, they have spouses who have lost their jobs, and the pressures are massive. So basically, Treasury, we had met with them several times. They have agreed to it, and then we had agreed that that wording that you saw on MTBPS announced by the minister was what we'd agreed to. That in essence, Treasury has committed to tabling a bill at Parliament allowing for this limited withdrawal from pension funds by distressed workers. That should be done by early next year, the latest. We would love to see it be done by end of December, if not by the budget speech next and about no later. But it also raises with the Treasury, and I think we must have further discussions. It might even be useful to include Dr. George. Do we want to use a private member's bill because it's already at Parliament and that can be a faster modality and just simply to expand upon it, etc. But I think the point was, Honourable Chair, was for that bill to be processed by the committee from the beginning of next year, to be passed by mid to next year, the latest, say around August, so that it could come into effect by 1 October 2021. We thought we couldn't delay any longer because workers are increasingly resigning from their jobs to cash out their pensions. They're looking for solutions, and this is their money, and you can't tell someone whose house is burning that they mustn't touch their savings because they need to save, etc. So I think for us, about getting the right balance. But I think lastly on that issue, Honourable Chair, we'd want to see a combination of options for workers. One is to withdraw a limited cash portion, say up to 30%. The other one is to a loan, but I think our preference is for cash because you don't also want to increase the indebted levelness of workers. But I think we can have further discussion with Dr. George because we need to flesh out some of the modalities more. To Honourable Karim, I would agree 200%. We are on the same boat together, and the boat has got many holes, not just one hole. I think our concern is that what is the right direction to take the boat? And we took comfort from the Presidential Economic Advisory Council, which advised not to have a rash austerity approach, but to first focus on stimulating the economy in a reasonable way to save companies and jobs so they can still pay taxes and not be a burden to the state. And then as the economy picks up steam, you can pay off the debt in a sustainable way. But I mean, for us, Comrade Chair, it's about the fundamental causes of the fiscal crisis, which is corruption and wasteful expenditure. We saw nothing in MTBPS proposing new measures there. It's about rebuilding the capacity of SARS, especially around customs duties. Chair, it is still inexplicable that SARS only inspects 5% of containers coming through our ports of entry for customs duty, and that is costing the economy billions and billions of rands every year. It is about fixing the SOE so they can stop being a drain on the state. And we think there is space, Comrade Chair, to look at reprioritizing the budget, but it should be done in a prudent manner, not just simply cutting from key economic or infrastructure investments. But Chair, around the wage bill, look, so the other areas we can save money. We can save some money in the wage bill, Chair, in the next 3-year agreement. I think we can save significant money if we have a single wage agreement for the entire state, not just the 800,000 public servants, but the other third of the state which works at entities or SOEs. You can place a cap on what management earns in SOEs. So for example, at ESCOM, you have 800 managers who earn more than 2 million rand a year. At SABC, they are retrenching workers left and right, but the management gets paid about 3.4 million often. What also helps us, Comrade Chair, on the wage bills that inflation has plummeted by almost half. So that gives significant breathing space. The other areas where we think we can find money, Chair, is that if we can fix the loan guarantee scheme or come with alternatives to it, or not simply to walk away from it as seemingly government is inclined to do. We've also had to push very hard as COSATU to force the UIF to invest money into the economy as a form of stimulus and to save companies and jobs. It's been quite an ugly process. We've had to literally fight with them every time there's an extension of the disaster management to get the UIF to agree to continue assisting workers who are not allowed by law to work with some income support. Again, Chair, there is space within the UIF to add more money to the pool. We do need a broader conversation about how the PIC invests money, because often we've seen in the past, the investments have been very dubious and have little benefit to the economy. So for example, the 9 billion rand that was given to one person to invest in Steinhoff before. Chair, the other concern about the wage bill, if we're too rash about it, so you freeze wages for nurses for 4 years. So do we think we'll still have those nurses afterwards? What will happen is that Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Canada, New Zealand will go and poach those nurses and doctors. We'll lose teachers to New Zealand, etc. Chair, I wanted to make the last point for Honourable Karim. So COSATU is not just complaining. We've offered to assist government. We've offered with the ESCOM to assist with the debt crisis with a clear plan around it. We've offered to support PIC investing ways to support economic growth. And of course, we've offered to tap significantly into the UIF to save the economy. But we want to see government and the private sector matching those contributions because we put our money where our mouths are. And there is no workers' pension fund which is on strike. They're all keeping up this economy, including the PIC. Honorable Chairperson, to your questions around NEDLAC, we think there has been a significant turnaround in NEDLAC in the past few years. Previously, the reputation was that things go to die at NEDLAC. We've managed to turn things around significantly and define a large areas of common agreement between labor, business, and government. We managed to, it took us about 2 years to get a minimum wage agreement. It took us a year to get a job summit agreement. On the ESCOM social compact, it literally took us a few weeks, at most 2 months, to come to an agreement. We've had good progress between ourselves and business and even government at times in the rapid response to the COVID. But I think the one fundamental crisis we're having in NEDLAC chair, and I think the role of MPs can be quite helpful, is the behavior of government. Government will come and engage and then walk away when they're not happy. We've been having engagements around extending the UIF benefits as of Thursday last week, only to find out at the same time the government at the NCCC decided to cancel the UIF terms benefits without engaging us. We had drafted an alcohol social compact to address the abuse of alcohol, but to save those industries dependent upon it, only for government to stop engaging. There have been many bills, Comrade Chair, which have left NEDLAC and then have gone to sit afterwards for years at a time in the different departments. And then we've been forced as COSATU to go and harass those departments to get them brought to Parliament. And it's again and again and again, we have to do it. I think, for example, the public procurement bill, the many labor law bills, the COFI bill, they just get stuck for years at the departments, not in NEDLAC. I think lastly, Comrade Chair, on the public procurement bill, I mean, for us, it's critical to overhaul public procurement system. We need to have a single procurement system for the entire state, not just the public service departments. So it must include the entities, the SOEs, and especially municipalities, which are really a cesspool for looting. We need to have an online procurement system that is transparent, that anybody, including the media, business persons, members of parliament, society can check to see who got what tender. And that if you can have that comprehensive system, Chair, it could also help government and labor, etc., to trackalize local procurement as well. Because right now there is no data around it within the state. And the state has about 20% of the procurement expenditure in the economy. But I think lastly, Chairperson, for us, we had raised the needed fast-track public procurement bill last year with the President in November last year. And to date, it hasn't come to NEDLAC. And we were quite shocked about 2 weeks ago to see that Treasury wants to take another 2 years to see it through to an enactment. And I think for us, Chair, government has to move with much greater speed if we're going to tackle these many crises. But thank you, Chair. Hope I didn't take too long.
Thank you so much, COSATU. Thank you for that. Saika, any responses?
Yes, thank you. There we go. Thank you, Honourable Abrams. To your first question on policy certainty, well, if we just look at the retirement reform, I think we've been dealing with this for a number of years now. We haven't got policy certainty where we're going, specifically now in regard to Regulation 28. A lot of speculation has been going around in the market that this is now going to be forcing pension funds to invest in government projects. And that worry about being forced to do something, although it has been said that it's not going to be that way, only now in the budget speech. We'd like certain clarity on that and just laying the ground rules, because the concern we have with the policy, and especially if we look at budget ceilings, you have certain policies that you're just not sticking to. And I think that's our overall message is that a whole lot of promises have been made, but they are not maintained. The action is just not there. We just keep changing it year after year. We have excuses. Things didn't work out. We're now just pushing the ceilings either. So I think policy certainty is something that we stick by. Even in the small business space, I think we need clarity on where are we going with small businesses. Yes, we're saying we're trying to make it easier for them. We do have a few working groups. We are making small steps in this regard, but we don't have time for small steps. We need to start making big changes so that specific sector can get off the ground and help us out of this dilemma that we're sitting in. If you're looking, your next question was on cutting government expenditure. definitely. There again, if we look at the government wage, what do we need there? It's quite simple. We need individual performance management progress. Yes, we can't cut in critical sectors, but are the people working there actually doing what they're meant to be doing? Are we getting the healthcare that we want? Are we getting the security that we want from the police? And we need to monitor that. If I don't do my job, I don't get paid. I don't. There are repercussions for not doing what I'm meant to be. And we need to see that happening in the government as well. And you can't do that unless you have certain criteria. People need to have certain KPIs that they need to meet. What are the specific performance indicators that they need to meet? And that needs to be clear to an individual, because it's also unfair to expect something of an individual and they don't know what's expected of them and then get rid of them. So we need clear performance indicators for each individual person to make sure that that aligns with the greater policy intent of the government. Regarding other cutting expenditure in other regards, SAICA did a big analysis of a lot of the government expenditure of the last 10 years that we highlighted in our budget speech. And just looking at a few of those, we can automatically, and we agree, especially on the wages side, the top bracket of wages need to be cut. The senior management excessive wages there that just aren't justifiable, even in the public sector. So that needs to be cut. If you look at police, there's certain expenditure going on there that shouldn't be happening. The catering costs, the transport costs, the consulting costs. Where is the analysis of those costs? Where is the in-depth analysis of what actually are we paying for? And what is the result of what we're paying for? If we're entering into projects, are there clear outcomes of the projects? Have they been met? And we can't decide that at the end. And I see a lot of, with the structural investment program, with a lot of the initiatives by the president, mentioned by the president, that he's going to be introducing to create jobs. Are we monitoring those? Not on a yearly basis. This needs to be, we now need critical monthly monitoring to make sure that we are actually achieving our objectives, to ensure that we do stimulate economy. And I agree fully. We need to reallocate to certain points, as Kusata mentioned, to SARS, and the police and healthcare. We do need reallocation, but we need reallocation from areas, and there's lots of other areas that mentioned that we can cut from, that need to be transferred to those critical functions at this stage. Yeah, and as to the municipalities and SOEs, that applies across the board, all the things that I've mentioned there before. And I know Honorable Karim mentioned, we have to, these are appropriation issues. Yes, there are, and we will take that up. But also there's trade-offs. There shouldn't have to be trade-offs at this stage. If government had stuck to what they said they were going to do, we wouldn't have to be coming back here every single time saying this needs to be done, that needs to be done. So if government can just stick to what they say they're going to be doing and do the right things, get rid of corruption, reduce crime, improve infrastructure, and get the government wage down realistically and in the best manner possible, then there shouldn't be any trade-offs. We should be doing the right thing. But at the moment, yes, there are, because we are not spending on the right thing, and that is causing us to incur debt, and that debt is the large problem that we're sitting with, as all the commentators have said, is that interest expense is now making our possibilities to do any meaningful changes very, very difficult. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sir. Responses from you?
Thank you, Chairperson. Can you hear me?
Okay. The fiscal cliff and responses.
Hello, Mr. Abraham.
Take volunteers to take over.
Hi.
Can we have some movements? Can you hear me, Alan? Can people hear me over there?
Yes, we can hear you, Chairperson.
Okay, I'm asking where's Outer?
I'm here, Chair.
I gave you the floor, Outer. What happened?
Thank you. I apologize. I think someone's connection was poor. But thanks for the questions, Chair. Let me get to them. I think, Mr. Karim, thank you very much for engaging. And I think it's important, the question of trade-offs and what are the alternatives. But first, let me just speak to the positionality of this forum and why we come here, and recognize that indeed I think we are all primarily talking about appropriations issues, but obviously that relates directly to the revenue that we can collect, which is in the purview of this committee. And our organization, our mandate is almost exclusively on the expenditure side. So that is what we look at primarily. So we will have a more extensive engagement with the Standing Committee and the Select Committee on Appropriations. But I should agree with the previous speakers to say that we have mentioned some alternatives. We have been saying that, for example, SOEs that have consistently been bailed out, the alternative would be to that, to stop doing that, to rationalize those entities or to eliminate them if need be. And we do believe that it is necessary for several major SOEs to be let go. That is an alternative. More fundamentally, I think we always talk about the wage bill in these forums, and understand it's a contentious issue. And even before COVID happened, there was a cap on the planned growth of the wage bill. And I think it was Kusatu last year who came and responded to that to say, but what about the state's role to really be an employer and facilitate transformation and economic transformation? I think that's crucial. It's a crucial point. If we look at the real socioeconomic outcomes of the fiscal policy, or the lack thereof, that we've seen over the past 10 to 20 years, the outcomes aren't very good. So why we, for instance, really support the principle of zero-based budgeting is because that is an alternative. We are really proposing that we need less of the same. And that would entail, for example, looking at municipalities. Again, this has been said just now, and it's really to the point, is people cannot be paid regardless of what they do. And people should earn wages, particularly when it comes to taxpayers who fund those wages. That is our positionality. So we have very little opportunity to engage with Parliament in this way. So I think we take the broad stroke and really try and maximize every forum we get. And that's really why I think you see so many appropriations issues always when we come here. On a fiscal policy committee that we are recommending, where that would be located, I think should be really the discretion of this committee. But we're thinking that it should be apolitical. We are comparing that, and I invite you to compare that to NEDLAC, which we see as a black box, which the public don't really have an opportunity to engage with. We don't really know what happens there. And obviously that is highly political. And political interference at every level of government has been a fundamental problem in how we decide how we spend the little tax revenue that we have. So having a fiscal policy committee that is relatively apolitical, that is more inclusive, more transparent, and really comprised of some financial experts and others, we think would be a better forum for high-level decision making. And you said that municipalities have huge problems, Mr. Karim. We agree very much, and that these problems are largely structural. And let's not be fatalistic. For sure, I think we really want to see change on the ground, which is, in municipal jurisdiction where economic activity actually happens, where people live and work. And for example, what we could do, as opposed to an indiscriminate reduction of wages at the municipal level, really to ensure that people see consequences if they do not, if their municipality, particularly those in authority like the executive and accounting authorities, if they do not achieve certain audit outcome goals, then they should be replaced. If they do not really achieve their objectives, surely there should be consequences and not annual increases in remuneration. That would be more sensible in our view. And that's an example of a structural change that could happen. And of course, when the Constitutional Court's order to allow independent candidates in Parliament comes about, and there's a change in the constituency system, how those are staffed, the human resource structure could also change. And these are fundamental changes that really influence our revenue side decision making that you make here and that National Treasury makes. Honorable Abram, thank you for the question. You asked the question, is cutting the wage bill not going to be detrimental for service delivery? I think we would disagree, and we would say no, because that's assuming that simply paying someone's wage will necessarily get them to do their job. And we've seen that that is not necessarily the case. That let's look at the examples of high-level cases of corruption that are now being pursued finally. People are still earning their salaries, and we welcome the statement by the president, for example, that those who are alleged to be corrupt and those who have not yet been cleared of serious allegations of corruption, that they should step aside. And of course, they should not continue earning wages. And that's just an example of, earning a wage doesn't necessarily mean you're going to benefit the public. You're going to do your job and deliver services. Some people get a salary and they don't do what they're supposed to. So what the solution could be, I would say, as I said before, there should be targets that especially people who earn bigger salaries must meet. And if they do not, there must be serious consequences. Ideally, they should be replaced. And finally, I just want to comment, Chairperson, you mentioned the public procurement bill and how that relates to the triple PFA and what the failures might have been with the triple PFA. I think that's a fundamentally important question, because what we want to do with targeted public expenditure is to bring about transformation and to really uplift people who are in poverty, to create employment and to reduce poverty, especially for historically disadvantaged people. But that hasn't happened. We've seen increased public expenditure without the equivalent increase in employment, without the equivalent increase in economic growth that really benefits marginalized people. So the triple PFA hasn't really achieved its objectives. So if the public procurement bill will really overshadow that in terms of concurrent jurisdiction, then it must do something differently than was done in the triple PFA, because it has not successfully uplifted people out of poverty. Thank you very much, Chair and honorable members.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Johnston. Fiscal Cliff, any comments from the study group of Fiscal Cliff? Okay.
Yes.
You on, Mr. Joubert?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a few short replies. Firstly, on the solutions, for a long time we've been saying let SAA go. So that's a relative obvious solution we gave. Unfortunately, it seems nothing is happening there. Second one we made a few times already at this committee is for only motor vehicles manufactured in South Africa to be utilized by government and local government officials. So that also is a relatively quick and easy way of getting some feedback into the manufacturing sector locally. Then also I think a lot of we've been talking about government debt and the government debt crisis. or public debt, but what about the household level debt crisis that we are also experiencing in South Africa? So I think it's related to the pension discussion, is whether we should have a relook at especially store level credit, and especially at the retail level. So whether that is actually helping people, or if that is adding to the financial hardship in South Africa. So I think a few difficult questions that we need to still look at there. Lastly, I want to agree with Mr. Johnson's comment about NETLAC. I think as an analyst and as an economist, it's often very frustrating that we've got these decisions being made, and then we simply hear that this and that has been said at NETLAC. Unfortunately, as he also called it, a black box or a closed box. So I think a little bit more openness in that sense would help an analyst and everyone a lot. And then just lastly, touching on the point of we also say that we need to get the economy going again. How are we going to do that? I think a lot have been said. The problem is the last 10 years, South Africa, we have basically been spending, especially on civil service remunerations, if you look at the increases, as if we are a rich country, as if we have a lot of resources. So the problem is we need to take stock, and we need to get us back into a position where we can actually afford those increases. And unfortunately, the only way to do that is to get some, new or better or, general plan in action that everyone sort of, we get an economic impact and we have a social cohesion behind that. So yes, that's just some suggestions, and some frustrations that we are also feeling in the private sector. Or and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Jobert. To come in now, Yunus Karim, second session.
No, just a quick thing, because obviously we need to guide the researchers on a draft report. So I just wanted to say, firstly, Chairperson, what's coming out of this is things that we need to start thinking about what we say in respect of our report on the fiscal framework next week, which we have to adopt, I think, on Tuesday or Wednesday. So the one thing that comes up again, which I think that's preoccupied the two finance committee, is the loan guarantee scheme. The percentage take on it is extremely low. So I think we need to pursue this further, by bringing Treasury and whoever else before the committee reasonably soon. That's one of the decisions we could take. Secondly, obviously it's not for us to discuss the intricacies of the public sector wage bill negotiations. That's for labor and government and other structures, other stakeholders to discuss in whichever, beside the public service bargaining chamber, there are other structures, obviously. So, we don't interfere in that. But Chairperson, it is true what Mr. Comrade Park says, right? That actually, if you look at health workers and so on, I mean, they really are important like never before, given COVID and its persistence for some years to come, or some future pandemic that's likely, and so on. So I think we shouldn't have a blanket approach to this thing. I know there are differences of views where people say, firstly, even within our own ranks, let the public sector wage bill reduced, and others say, well, fulfill the bargaining agreement, the 3-year cycle that was agreed to, and so on. So, I mean, we need obviously a differentiated approach of some sort to certain sectors and so on. But that's a matter for negotiations with MIAU and whoever else is relevant, public sector association and so on. Now, there too, it's trade-offs. Again, we keep coming back to this, that, you can't have blanket positions on either side, given the exceptional circumstances we're in, and given the economic, financial, and health crisis we're facing, is all I'm basically saying. When we say we need more inputs on trade-offs, we know the generic trade-offs, scrap SAA and you'll save 10.5 billion and perhaps more money and so on. Those are like general statements, which are, trade-offs, if you like. But what I think I'm trying to say is that we need more rands and cents things, and that's more an appropriations matter, but where exactly? I know obviously it's difficult for stakeholders. They don't have the capacity and resources and technical expertise that Treasury has. No, indeed does our committee. But that's the sort of thing I think we're looking for more than ever. On the matter of data, Chairperson, I think we should put something in our report, Chairperson. We have to reduce data. In any case, these data companies, they're doing extremely well. If you think of Zoom, for example, it's a global example of a company, Comrade Chair, which was barely known until COVID hit us, right? And look at the profits it's now making. Look at the big tech profits that have accrued in the last 7 months and so on. And even I see the US government and other established democracies are looking into the power and profits of big tech and the monopolies there. On the fiscal policy group, now, I think AOTA should send us a paragraph or two on that. But also, it isn't time to engage, but I think we should note that, fiscal issues like the budget as well are ultimately political. They're not technical. The idea of getting in some financial experts may be useful. Treasury does it every now and then with different structures that they have within their department. But let's hear what there is there. Ultimately, this will be answerable, if there's any structure, to National Treasury. And the decisions that are made ultimately will be made by government and the minister before that, but they are political decisions. So yes, you can get technical expertise. And in fact, we in Parliament also listen to it all the time. But ultimately, the decisions we make are political, based, of course, on technical considerations. Then again, just to repeat, Chairperson, we need to remind members, I'm sure the committee secretaries will do that later today, and I've done it probably already, that to ensure completely accurate representation of the key point made by the stakeholders, which is covered in the first half of our reports, in the second half or third, we put our recommendations down. Can they please, by Friday, 12 o'clock or Friday, 5 p.m. at the latest, send us their one-page summary of the key points of their submissions. They can also take into account the exchanges we've had in the Q&A session. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Honorable Karim. Those are valuable inputs, and I'm hoping that they are being recorded as such so that they form a part of our report. Now we go on to Healthy Living Alliance. Is the president. Healthy Living Alliance. Is that you, Mr.
Yes,
Mbalatsi?
yes, Madam Chair.
Okay.
I'm just sharing the
Should.
Just checking if I'm allowed to share the screen. Can you see my screen, Madam Chair?
Your screen is visible. Continue.
Yes, we can. Okay, thank you so much. So greetings to the Standing Committee on Finance and Finance Committee. Thank you, Madam Chair, for this opportunity. My name is Lawrence Mbalati, representing the Healthy Living Alliance, in short, HELA, which is an alliance. It's a leading alliance of civil society and academic organization advocating for food policies that help to save lives. I'll go to my first slide. Actually, the first slide is a depiction of how susceptible and vulnerable and how South Africans have gotten into a bigger risk of getting non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, stroke, cancer, etc. And I think, again, it shows that it's a looming crisis that we are facing, or in terms of the burden of the non-communicable diseases that is causing a severe strain in the public health system. We know that COVID has actually exposed the pervasive nature of deeply rooted inequality and hunger in terms of the burden of the non-communicable disease. And it shows that, failure to address non-communicable diseases primarily through prevention put the country and people's lives at greater risk. So COVID-19 has amplified that now more than ever. We do need a progressive policies and realization to cap the scourge of non-communicable disease in the country. We've seen, as we can see in the slides, the people at greater risk of illnesses and death were people living with non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and so on. The following slide really, it's a portrayal of the cost, of failing primarily on prevention. There's an old saying that I've always been saying, prevention is better than cure. If we look at the cost of diabetes, currently at 2.7 billion, and the estimations and the projections that are actually showing in terms of if we don't deal decisively and urgently with the crisis of non-communicable diseases, diabetes as an example, in this case, we are seeing an 8-fold increase in expenditure, equating to the 12% of the national health budget in terms of dealing with diabetes. We have not included other non-communicable diseases. So it's clear that primarily focusing on prevention and health promotion is key, and making sure that there is political will to address, to implement policies that addresses non-communicable diseases urgently. So Healthy Living Alliance has been advocating, amongst other things, the implementation of the health promotion levy, also known as the sugary drinks tax or sweetened beverage tax. And South Africa has to be commended. In April 2018 was the first country to implement, in the African region, to introduce the tax on sweetened beverages, with two purposes at heart, to address the rising rates of diet-related NCDs and to generate revenue. And that's how it was being applied. And it has to be understood that the tax is not for the sugar, but it's for the sugar sweetened beverages based on the quantities as outlined. And we've seen an amazing, over 3 billion of revenue raised on the first fiscal year, April 2018 to October 2019, was a much needed revenue to provide services, amongst other things, including, funding key healthcare and other social, services that the people of South Africa need. So we have already, it's early days, but we've already seen, some signs and results in terms of like curbing the consumption of excessive sugar as a result of HPL. Unfortunately, when we're pushing during the parliamentary submission, we're pushing for a 20% increase, which is a baseline recommended by the World Health Organization. But we know that the health promotion levy was only implemented at 11%. And currently, the health promotion levy excludes other sweetened beverages such as fruit juices. And this we believe create a false impression, to people who are categorized, if there is such, like middle class, maybe ourselves. If you believe you are middle class, I believe there's rich and poor. The impression is that, fruit juices are healthier. And I think we see many people, switching into fruit juices now with a misconception. But research has shown that, fruit juices are just as equally, if not more, having similar sugar content. And because they are marketed as healthier alternative, then it creates that problem. And I think we, as Healthy Living Alliance, we believe we can learn from countries such as Malaysia, who have introduced fruit juices as a progressive realization of expansion of promoting and protecting the health promotion levy, to expand, the tax into fruit juices as a way of increasing revenue and preventing diet-related non-communicable diseases. Going into recommendations, Madam Chair, we think it's absolutely crucial now that we do a stock taking 2 years into the implementation of the sugary drinks tax or the health promotion levy, to take stock on how can we have a progressive realization of the tax working and ensuring that it can actually equip and influence diet transition, either in the reformulation, in an increase in the tax, and the expansion of tax into the fruit juices, because we believe it's absolutely crucial that we do not go back, as much as the industry is really fighting tooth and nail to this tax. But we believe everyone who's producing unhealthy products, it's either you pay sin tax. We have seen South Africa implementing progressive laws on tobacco, and preventing the excessive consumption and the abuse of alcohol. We believe the sugar and we believe the beverage industry and the food industry has to own up and work with South Africans to prevent the diet-related non-communicable diseases that are spilling out of control. So we strongly encourage the investigation into increasing the health promotion levy tax from 11% to 20%, as benchmarked ideally by the World Health Organization. To make this tax more effective, we urge policymakers, we're urging for a political will to include the fruit juices into the health promotion levy. We also request that the Treasury can work, with civil society organization in more of evidence and transparency, in the decision making and rationale around the health promotion levy and other health taxes. We believe there's an opportunity, to while we are grappling with COVID-19 and non-communicable diseases, that due to health demands and budget deficit, we feel that now more than ever, SA will benefit from increased health promotion levy tax, which will serve as an additional revenue resource and will simultaneously help to reduce risk related to obesity. Just on the recommendations, Chair, as I'm still within time and I'm coming to the end, is that we are looking at the progressive, policy direction, working class movements like COSATU, civil society organization, and government pushing for health reform, such as the National Health Insurance. We know the National Health Insurance will require a fund, and we believe the health promotion levy can be one of the bigger mechanisms to fund health and ensuring that everyone has access to equitable healthcare in South Africa. So we believe the calm heads, that are in the forum, the Standing Committee on Finance will bring Treasury in, and we can have a conversation. Even further submissions were required, summarized or in detail, detailing the evidence that is backing, our call to a stronger sugary drinks tax or health promotion levy. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Balati. A good timing there. The last one will be Mr. Peter Mieken. Thank you, Mr. Mbalenzi, for taking yours off. Mr. Peter, will you take the floor meanwhile?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
And
Continue, please.
And can you see
Yes.
my screen? Can
Okay.
you see my screen?
Not yet, not yet. Just share your screen.
Okay. Well, I don't know what I must do. Must I do something?
Mr. Meeker, I've made you co-host, so you should be able to project your document, unless you want me to do it.
Like that? Can you see that? Can you see that?
No.
No, we can't see anything.
Well, I've got the document up here on my screen in Word.
Okay, Mr. Myeken, do you
Yeah.
mind having Mr. Wickhop sharing the screen for you?
No, not at all.
Thank you. Can you do that? Alan?
Alan, do I have to do anything?
I'm busy from my side. It should reflect in a second.
Thank you. There you are. Can you see it, Mr. Myeken?
I can see it. Can you see it?
Yes. Thank you. Continue then.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. I got it now. Right now. Okay. First of all, then, I'd just like to say something to my old friend, Mr. Karim, who keeps worrying about my age. And I must explain to him that Winston Churchill was the same age as I am when he was still Prime Minister of England and he just won a war. So I think he must know that. And the second thing is, why am I always last in these discussions? Every time I come here, I'm last. Well, today, last is going to be first because I've got some good news for you.
You are a veteran.
Sorry? What did you say?
She says you're a veteran, so yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, look, I'm not sure why I can't do something with this screen because I need to go back a page. Can you see that, Alan?
What do you want to do, Mr. Myeken?
Mr. Meeken, if you can just indicate what page you're on.
I'm on page 1, which is actionable structural reforms which conform to the Constitution. That is different to the page that I sent you.
Okay, well, this is the document you sent me. I don't have any other document from you.
All right. Well, then I'll have to. I'm going to just read from the document. I'm going to go off the screen. Is that all right? Yeah.
Yes, please do that, Mr. Myeken.
Okay. Right. Now, what we've been hearing from everybody today is as if they were the new Minister of Finance, and this would be different to what the Minister of Finance is doing. I'm taking a different tack on there. I'm saying that we must do exactly what the Minister of Finance did, in 2018 in his MTBPS. I'm sorry you can't see it, but what he said there, and it's on my screen, and that's in my, it is Annexure A in my paper. What he says there is, National Treasury record. It says that you've got to change from income tax to land taxes, and that's in his MTBS, and I'll read it to you. It says, National Treasury recognizes the potential improvements in efficiency from land taxes, as highlighted in the OECD report, Taxation on Economic Growth. Land is an immobile form of capital, which can increase in value. The Davis Committee does not raise any valid concerns. National Treasury has been attending workshops to explore this topic. This was 2 years ago. There are some problems. There are some practical intergovernmental arrangements, but the instrument can potentially improve the efficiency of the tax system. Now, I'd just like to explain what land taxes are, because they might be unknown to you. That they are used in places like Hong Kong and Singapore. In fact, in Hong Kong, they could be the only form of tax, because nobody owns any land in Hong Kong, so that we don't have to change any title deeds in South Africa. But here is what a land tax is. It's a multiple of rates and taxes, excluding all improvements, dwellings, offices, shops, hotels, dams. Land taxes yield the same revenue as income taxes as that, but they're fixed in July each year. Citizens can therefore work and invest for up to 16 hours per day, 7 days a week, and 365 days a year without paying any more to SARS. The taxable value of the land is a state subsidy, for these values depend not on citizens or companies, but on size, location, state infrastructure, and services, and nature's endowment. There's nothing in there which an individual or a company can change. Whilst income taxes depend entirely on the owner's hard-earned wages, salaries, interest, profits, dividends, capital gains, and consumption, that by taxing peoples, we are making life very difficult. And in fact, it increases the cost of living. Taxing all of those wages, salaries, etc., it increases the average cost of living in South Africa by 70,000 Rand per annum per household. Now, this is because at a tax rate of 28%, 15% being VAT, goods and services cost 1.14 trillion Rand more than needs be. And the tax shortfall reduces the value of land assets in personal balance sheets. But that is matched by an increase in other tax-free assets. So, therefore, if you can change from income taxes and VAT to land taxes, you do away with robbery, because currently that 1.4 trillion on people's wages, salaries, and rent is just robbery. It's like taking it out of your pocket. A replacement of income tax and VAT by land taxes can be phased in over 4 years. Now, there is immediately, we're worried about how much people are borrowing. How much we owe people with the income taxes. But if you were to just replace income taxes with land taxes, you would save 667 billion Rand. Now, 660 billion Rand is enough to repay Eskom's and Sanral's debts in 18 months. So this is a serious suggestion. This is an actionable structural reform which conforms to the Constitution. Let me go on to the next point. The first thing is, let's take Section 25, because these also conform to the Constitution, which is a vital matter. Section 25, many people don't even have an address these days. But with land taxes, they will have to have an address. And funny enough, there's a new form of there's a new software out called What 3 Words. And if you just look that up on the net, you'll find that every three square meters of land in the world now has an address which is described as What 3 Words, like well, I'm Peter Ian Meakin, but that wouldn't be that's not the address of my thing, but that's what it is. Now the second thing, important thing is, in order to, also section 25, in order to make land readily accessible to everyone, as section 25 says, the state needs to also zone farmland for secure allotment villages and towns. These are like retirement villages, but with horticulturists, not carers. They should each house up to 1,000 families. The second, well, I've talked about the inefficiency of income taxes. And in fact, in the Constitution, in section 228, it says the taxes are prohibited if they contradict in any way the policy of the state in terms of creating jobs, getting people onto land, increasing GDP, and income taxes reduce all of that. There's also a matter of sovereign funding. Now, if you look in my paper, you'll see a lovely picture of Singapore, where you can, there's very expensive social housing there, and right next door you can see what we're producing for the same sort of people. No, the situation is this: the Constitution says that the people have got to have adequate housing. Now, if you can't afford it, then you must print the money, and that's something which is quite a long argument, but it's valid. Do we want housing for our people, or do we want some reason why we shouldn't print the money and give them decent houses? I don't think. Who's going to stop them? Who's going to stop the government if it says I'm going to spend a lot of money, but it's going to be printed, but you get decent houses? Now, the final point I'm making is that the President's Infrastructure Fund is not attracting investors. However, when taxes on capital investments are revoked, foreign direct investors will be queuing up with their checkbooks. And it is not necessarily dependent on investors in banks to pay for these works and to pay interest on these costs. For every cent paid for roads, railways, dams, ports, sewage plants, etc., adds value to land. Sometimes it adds more value than the cost. This happened at the Jubilee underground stations in London. There, the value of land in the vicinity increased by 3 times. I hope you will accept this submission, and the spirit is intended. I have reserved the copyright of it because I want to be certain that when it's introduced in accordance with my professional valuation skills. And I'm also going to raise a fee for this work because it resolves so many problems. And I judge that 3% of the trade savings that we make is the amount which each taxpayer will be willing to pay to end these fruitless and wasteful expenditures and unconstitutional practices. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Meakin. That was a mouthful. And I can assure you that we don't practice ageism in these committees. We don't do that. We believe that the best leaders lead until they are well into their 90s. So your input has really been valuable. Thank you so, so much. And honorable members, can we have some takers on the 2 presentations, please? Can we see some hands? Are there any hands over there? Alan?
No hands as yet, Chair.
Nothing yet.
Okay. While we're waiting for members to come in, if they will, Mr. Mbalati, I have just 2 questions for you. The one question is around the issue of the fruit juice. Remember, I don't know whether you are saying that the 100% is deceitful or what, but there is fruit juice that is made of fruit and fruit only. Would you agree with that? And what would then be your take on that in terms of protection? Because when you legislate, you have to have that kind of exception if you agree with me. Secondly, Mr. Mbalati, you know, I am also interested in knowing what then do you do to ensure prevention? Of course, apart from the policy intervention that you are currently engaged in, but one is also interested to know how you are assisting the nation. Thank you. I'll have that so far. Can I get a response from you, Mr. Mbalati?
Yes, thank you, Chair, for 2 great questions. So fresh fruits are healthy as part of our diets. But when converted to fruit juice, the amount of sugar becomes concentrated because more fruit is needed to make up a volume of a juice. This free sugar is excessive, and these drinks are no longer as healthy as eating a whole fruit, and as a benefit of fiber are lost. Furthermore, although the sugar in fruit juice occurs natural, our body's processing of this sugar is the same as added sugars in processed SSB. So, and that's the delusion that most of us have had, that, you know, if you're taking fruit juice, and I hope the brief explanation that I gave in terms of the research that have been done in the sugar content. For example, if you're making a 1 liter of fruit juice, you need a lot of fruits that you need to squeeze into it, hence making the sugar in it more and going in there without the fiber. So the processing of the sugar in the fruit juice then makes us to be more at risk of sugar-related, diet-related NCDs. In terms of the work that we already do as the Healthy Living Alliance, we are doing a lot of awareness through the mass media campaign. We have a mass media campaign where we educate, people about the harms of excessive sugar, of consuming excessive sugar. We also on the ground do a lot of awareness and education to communities around, the need for diet transition and for eating healthy. So we believe these texts work in combination, with other work in terms of educating the public and our communities on the harms of unhealthy diet, ultra-processed food, and the excessive consumption of sugar and salt and trans fats. So I think these are combination methods. We are not in any way implying that tax works on their own, but we've seen in tobacco, before the tax was implemented on tobacco, 4 people out of 10 in South Africa were smoking. With taxes and education on the harms of tobacco, now 2 people out of 10 are smoking. So these are combination methods. We know taxes works, and it's a way of also generating revenue for the state, so that people who continue wants to consume the unhealthy products, they must pay, for the nation, for the nation to be healthy in that way.
Okay, okay, Mr. Mbalati. I would like to have a further conversation with you.
Chair?
Okay, I'll give you now, Ms. Honorable Mahlangu, because I really want to argue that if you juice fruit, you can take in a lot of fiber. But that's a side conversation. I do not want to belabor the point. I would like to for Mr. Nieken to just unpack the point he makes on income taxes being equivalent to robbery. I just wanted clarity on that. Honorable Mahlangu.
Thank you, Chairperson. I wanted to come in on the issue of the 100% Jews. And I think since we had these discussions on sugar tax in the 5th Parliament and to now, one has been making an engagement and trying to understand what do we mean by 100% Jews. I want to believe that when we talk about 100% Jews, which does not have any sugar or any other contents added to that, is the fruit that you will process on your own and it remains fresh for a certain period. So if it's fresh fruit, or 100% juice, which is in a store, stay for a several period, it's no more fresh, and I don't think it's 100% juice. There are other contents that has been added to that. That's my belief. It's really not 100% juice. It does have some sugar in it and other contents. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Honorable Mahlangu. Mr. Nieken?
Chairperson, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I asked to speak, preferably before the two presenters respond. Perhaps you missed me, but very quickly, the first thing is HELA needs to know, as I'm sure they do, that the majority in the finance committees, at the time we process, as you yourself know, Comrade Chair, time we process the sugar beverages tax, the health levy as it's called, we're very supportive of HELA and those who presented their case. They'll recall we said we've never come across such a brilliant set of inputs for the case against sugar in the beverages to the extent they are. But we also have to balance that out, as HELA well knows, with the many considerations, the concerns about farmers, more generally established farmers, emerging farmers, African farmers particularly, workers. We had to negotiate with the union movement and so on. And we took that matter in an unprecedented way, you recall, Chairperson, to NEDLAC, which doesn't normally, at least until then we were told, negotiate around tax issues. But at the same time, you will recall, Chairperson, we said it's a transitional phase, that we will look at it anew and so on. So in principle, as I recall it, unless there's a big change in this term, we don't have any difficulties, as I recall it, most of us, with what HELA generally says. It's about, the trade-offs at different times. Right now, you've got COSATU's Matthew Parks there. He will agree with everything, presumably. I can't speak for him with HELA, but also say, what about our workers? What about emerging farmers? What about transformation in the sugar industry and so on? So on the matter of fruit juice, as I recall it, HELA had said then, is that actually there's what fructose, which is almost as bad as sugar. And they suggested to us that they gave us the same amount of milliliters of a fruit juice and a can of Coke, and said actually there's more sugar. I think Momanyat and them also from Treasury, the co-chairperson, said that. So I think really these are complex issues. They're not something that we can address right now fully and comprehensively. But I do think, Chairperson, that after the February 2021 budget, at some stage, once we've done, let's say in the second quarter of next year, We need to have a full discussion on this issue with all of its imperatives, also see where things are at NIDLAC, because the deal, you'll recall, Chairperson, to my new members in particular, was that okay to the sugar beverages tax, but at the same time, there'll be import tariffs and so on to ensure that we are not flooded with imports in that industry and so on, and create more space for emerging and established South African farmers. Then secondly, Chairperson, just to say that, and I address this to National Treasury in particular, that Mr. Meekin was here, as ever he is, as always he is. In fact, Mr. Meekin, Chairperson, like anybody, has the right to be heard. And when they, senior citizens like him, whether they come from Bulundlele or from Cape Town makes no difference. They are South African citizens and we need to show them some respect. So it's got nothing to do that we are buddies. Let me stress, not ideological buddies. He knows that full well. But Mr. Meekin is unusual, like other activists are, that they have strong views and they never give up, which is something that you and I, Chairperson, and others here will admire, because we are the same, only we have different approaches. Now, he's, to put it crudely, land-only tax approach. It's a legitimate one. National Treasury doesn't agree with it. The majority, I imagine, in the ANC won't agree with it. But he has a right to be heard and he has a right to be responded to. So on Friday, when National Treasury appears before this committee, unlike the last time, Chairperson, they need to reply to him, as indeed they need to reply to Kosatu and Saika and Hila and everybody else. He too should be replied to rather than being ignored. So Chairperson, I think this is something that's only fair, and this time around Treasury on Friday, kindly respond. I see, Chairperson, you're interested to also ask him about his views, and I'm sure he'll be quite adroit in replying to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Meekin?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yes, okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, good, okay. Now, there's just one flaw in what Mr. Karim, whom I have great respect for. It's always been the flaw. My argument is not come to the top of my head. My argument is that income taxes and VAT are unconstitutional. I was here in 1994, and I put that, and that was the argument I put to the CODESA. And if you look in 25.5, that is reflected quite strongly, that you should not, that you should enable people to get to land. And if you if you tax land, you make land affordable. You make it, it becomes, the capital cost reduces to a rent. Simultaneously, you have to stop taxing people's work and investments. Now that's what you brought up, Chair. You said, why is this robbery? No, let me try and explain to you, because let's suggest that one evening somebody comes into your house and takes a quarter of all of your goods and chattels and food and walks away with it. Now, do you think that's robbery? I'm asking you a question, Chair. Okay, well, let me say, I think that's robbery. I think that's nothing. You can't call it anything else. And that is what happens. And of course, the stupidest thing is that when you if you earn 10,000 Rand a month, which is I used to earn, now if you're taxed on that, it would come to 2,800 Rand a month that the state takes from me. It doesn't take it from the land. It takes it from my work and my investments. So that's why it's called robbery. And if you read St. Matthew, you will see that he said he's quite clear about that too. He says, Caesar, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. But Mr. Karim seems to forget is that is not what Caesar says belongs to him. It's what it must be what the land produces. Adam and Eve didn't have to have a bond when they settled in the Garden of Eden. Thank you. Anything else?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Niken. Yeah, you ending off with my favorite concept, and I'm not sure if Mr. Karim understands a lot about what happened in the Garden of Eden. Honorable members, this brings us to the end of our discussions. If there are no other hands, at this point, the next item on the agenda is closing remarks and vote of thanks, and that I will allocate to the House of the Lords, and Honorable Yunus Karim will do that for us. Honorable Karim.
Hi. So firstly, all I want to say, Chairperson, is a reminder to the stakeholders, civil society in particular, obviously, those who are here, that on Friday, we get National Treasury to reply to their submissions, and they are free also to reply to National Treasury. And then, in fact, Treasury replies to them, and then we start working on the report with the team. So we also, between now and next week, the two chairs in particular, read most of the submissions. And since there aren't so many, it's relatively easy to do by Monday or so next week, and then we get the report done. Thirdly, another reminder is for them to please send by, let's say, Friday, 5 p.m., but even sooner if they can, a one-page summary of their main points. We will try as far as possible to include as much of that as possible. Then the next thing to point out is that people have written, I think the Chairperson, Joe Maswangani, is addressing that, about complaints about the lack of time between the MTBPS last Wednesday and the hearings this Wednesday. But they need to remember, and yes, we agree that some of the criticisms are valid, but we need to remind colleagues and in fact the public and the stakeholders that this is only part of the process. There's also the discussions on Friday. Then there's the appropriations public hearings, the two sets of bills that they deal with, the Division of Revenue and the Appropriations Bill. And there's a whole process that goes on, including the NCOP, where provinces are consulted and so on. So in short, it is quite an elaborate process. This is only the first part of it, but we need, Chairperson, to also look at extending the time, which is something we did in 2017-2018 in terms of the law, except it's much more difficult with the MTBPS than it is with the budget, because obviously the longer the delay between the MTBPS and the fiscal framework discussions, because the appropriations can only start after we finish, then the longer you go into December. So those are also considerations about the parliamentary calendar. But we must thank everybody, as I'm sure you'll agree with me, Chairperson, for their inputs, and to say we'll give it the earnest consideration it deserves, but there are no easy answers. We'll do our best. And then there's still also the appropriations matters. Thank you very much, Comrade Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Karim. Just for noting and for the record, honorable members and colleagues, there were other submissions that were received from Pay the Grant campaign, and the other one is Gatsia Capital Partner, and the other one is Dear South Africa campaign. We just wanted to put it on record that those submissions were also received. Honorable members, colleagues, thank you so much for making time to be in this meeting and contributing so much. The meeting stands adjourned. Thank you.
Well done, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, dear.
Noxie.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Hello.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well done.
Bye-bye. Bye. Take care.